episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so as you can see from the title page, this week we're taking a look at Bunnahabhain, and it's been a number of years since I last did an episode of the show on Bunnahabhain, on one and only show on Bunnahabhain in actual fact, and so I thought it was long overdue a revisit, shall we say, and I had absolutely nothing at all with a visit from the Distillery rep the other week whatsoever. Honestly, no, I had it planned ages ago, and in actual fact I did, to be fair. I mean, all the samples for today's episode of the show come from round one of this year's World Whisky Awards, and Bunnahabhain is a regular, puts in a regular appearance at the World Whisky Awards, and I've been fortunate enough to do Islay whiskies for round one for a couple of years now. Certainly, I think this year, it wasn't last year. I think the year before I certainly did. Pretty much this year it was a shootout between Bunnahabhain and Ardbeg. So they had all five of the I guess the core range, for want of a better word, bottlings from Bunnahabhain up against 7 bottlings from Ardbeg, and the only other two were, I think, Ben Bracken and Lagavulin 16. I think they were the only other two Islay entries, and so and of course the 25-year-old Bunnahabhain came away with world's best Islay whiskey, and bloody well deserved, I think, to be honest with you. But anyway, so Bunnahabhain, okay, I don't really need to go into a huge amount of history, but one of the things I love about Bunnahabhain is the perception that absolutely nothing has changed with the distillery since the dawn of time, really. The core range of 12, 18 and 25 seems to have been in place for donkey's years, and I'm guessing it's probably all down to their rather good marketing to sort of get that across, because the reality is that in whiskey, as in everything, change happens all the time. I mean, if you look at their range, yes, the core range is pretty much as it always has been, and there's limited editions that seem to come and go. But yeah, things have changed, and certainly the distillery changed hands a few times. Certainly in the past sort of 20 odd years, it certainly has. I mean, it was, purchased from Highland Distillers by Edrington in 1999, then purchased by Burn Stewart, run by Distell, in 2003. Apparently they paid 10 million, which was quite a lot of money, I guess, in 2003, but now it looks like an absolute bargain. I imagine that this distillery must be worth at least 3, maybe 4 times that figure. So, but who knows whether they will sell. I think it's probably very unlikely. But anyway, we're not really worried about that. What we're worried about is the juice, and here is where I have a bit of an issue. Yes, I love Bunnahabhain. I love the way that it's very lightly peated, and they kind of go against the grain of the perception of Islay whiskies, which has to be big and peaty and monstrous and all that kind of stuff. Yes, all right, you can argue that they're slightly monstrous in the sherry monster mould, and this is kind of, I suppose, where I have a bit of an issue, because unlike some distilleries like, say, Dalmore, Glendronach, Glenfarclas, for example, whose spirit is, shall we say, somewhat hard and industrial and really needs to be swamped in sherry, Bunnahabhain is completely the opposite. It doesn't need sherry. Bunnahabhain's spirit is beautiful. It's aromatic. It's fruity. It's summery. It's damn gorgeous. And I really ought to do an independent episode of the show, because if you really want to taste Bunnahabhain without any sherry, then you're going to have to go to the independents. Bunnahabhain itself, the 12-year-old is a combination of American oak and sherry, but everything else is all sherry. Well, apart from the Quabernash, which seems to have disappeared off, which is a shame, because I love that. All American oak, bit of peat, relatively heavily peated in Bunnahabhain terms anyway, but I suppose if you go back to certainly the Edrington days of ownership of the distillery, the 12-year-old, although was more variable in quality, I would say, had a lot less sherry, and you got a lot more of the American oak character, the beautiful sort of aromatic barley quality of the spirit. But since the takeover by Distell, the 12-year-old certainly appears to be more sherry influenced than it did in the Edrington days. I would say the quality has improved and is a lot more consistent. And I also love the fact that they upped the ABV from 40% to 46.3. Not for any sort of, I would say, overt quality reasons, but that giving it that extra oomph, that extra intensity. And I'm guessing they also did away with colouring and chill filtration, which I certainly know they don't do at the distillery now, and I might have done during the Edrington days, possibly. But always difficult to say with those things unless you actually know for definite, which I don't. As I kind of make suppositions, shall we say, and but anyway, so I do love Bunnahabhain, and I really must do an independent bottling of the show because, like I said, aged in American oak, Bunnahabhain is absolutely gorgeous. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to have a look at the core range with the two new additions, which I think are additions to the core range, if memory serves me correct. And obviously, as you can see from the title page, the marketing guys have been at it, and what's that horrible term that they tend to use? Oh yes, a brand refresh. Oh God, don't you hate these terms? Anyway, what I will say is that I do like the changes. I think they've kind of done a really good job. They've kind of kept the traditional, in inverted commas, feel of the labelling and the bottling and what have you, and just given it a bit of a more modern twist. So I must say I do like the new brand refresh, if I hate the term. But anyway, but like I said, frippery and packaging and all that kind of stuff aside, then it's really, at the end of the day, fairly irrelevant. What is irrelevant is what is the juice like in the bottle. And well, I think I shall shut up now, introduce the range, and get on with finding out what the juice is like. Right, okay, so as I obviously mentioned earlier, all these are bottled at 46.3, and of course when you get samples for competitions and you see the list of Islers and you go, no age statement, 46.3 again, well that's obviously going to be Bunnahabhain, isn't it, or 12-year-old, all that kind of stuff. It's a bit of a giveaway, but anyway, so we're going to kick off with the 12-year-old. Like I said, this is a vatting of both spirit aged in American oak and ex-sherry casks, and as you can see from the colour, it's obviously lighter than the other samples I have, but still, like I said, certainly since the Edrington days, there certainly seems to be a lot more sherry being used in that particular bottling. Right, okay, time to murder a bit of Gaelic now. So we're now going to move on to the first of the two new no age statement bottlings. This is the Stiùireadair, I believe it's pronounced, which means helmsman in Scottish Gaelic. So this was, I believe, lined up to be a replacement for the 12-year-old, but this is all aged in sherry, both first fill and second fill casks, and I think it would be a bit of a shame to get rid of the only bottling that's in your range that actually has a little bit of American oak character. Anyway, I don't believe they have replaced the 12-year-old, and it's not the 12-year-old has been around since the late 70s. It's a well-loved bottling. Why get rid of it? That seems completely barking to me, and thankfully they haven't replaced it. So anyway, that is the Stiùireadair. I think the pronunciation was pretty good there, which is thanks to the website, which kind of gives you a phonetic pronunciation of these Gaelic words. Then we're going to move on to the good old 18-year-old, again bottled at 46.3 and 100% sherry matured. And then on to the 25-year-old. Again, 100% sherry matured, regularly wins competitions, and not much more you can say about that. I mean, it's interesting that the 25-year-old. Well, it's interesting if you go back beyond Edrington to the Highland Distillers Company days of ownership, and their wood policy was pretty ropey, it has to be said, and there was some god-awful Salford Bunnahabhain floating around that was distilled in the late 80s and early 90s, and I think the 18-year-olds obviously now only just starting to come out of the old regime, shall we say, which is, thank God for that, but the 25-year-old obviously hasn't, but I've never had an issue with sulphur taint at all on the 25-year-old, so anyway, that's just an aside. And the final bottling we'd be looking at is, and I'll just read the pronunciation and hopefully get it somewhere close to right, Toiteach A Dhà. I think sound like I'm talking Klingon when I'm trying to pronounce that. I mean, to me it looks like Toiteach, but I know that's not correct. It's Toiteach H. Oh God, I don't bloody know. Anyway, it's their peated bottling. Well, it's produced with what they call their peated malt, which I believe they call Moyne, and it's aged for around about 10 years, and it's aged in a combination of American oak and sherry, and I believe the Gaelic name means smoky too. I mean, this was if you go back a few years, there was an original bottling store called Toiteach or Toiteach or whatever. So I'm thinking this is just basically a sort of that bottling part two, if you see what I mean. Well, that's what it kind of means to me. Whether that's true or not, of course, that's another matter. Anyway, that's enough of murdering Gaelic. Let's taste some whiskey now, shall we? Which I'm more happy about doing, it has to be said. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the 12-year-old. Let's see what the notes gives us on this then, shall we? Actually, it's quite pleasantly balanced. Yes, there's a lot of sherry character. There's a lot of raisins, sultana, dried orange. It kind of comes across obviously as it's a vatting of American oak and sherry, as an almost kind of like it's been completely aged in refill casks. It's got that sort of quite light and aromatic kind of style of sherry. There's a little bit of vanilla, and I can get a little bit of barley. I still think that this is, even though, like I said, the sherry has been upped, I still think this is a lovely bottling. There's a little sort of coastal nuance on the back, and there's also a little bit of smoke, but it's the excuse me, the richness of the sherry cask, which is the obvious sort of main focal point of the nose. Little bit of tar, but yeah, mainly sort of sweet, sort of sherried fruits. Almost a touch of digestive biscuit now. A little bit of almost kind of gristy, not quite gristy, yeah, more sort of, yeah, kind of warty, sort of digestive biscuity kind of notes. Yeah, I mean that's a lovely nose, and let's see what the palate's like. A lot more sherry on the palate, a lot darker, a lot richer, more sort of raisinated fruits, walnut, sultana, touch of salt, very, very rich, dark, quite quite treacly. We're not quite sort of PX level treacle or PX level grapiness, but it has certainly got a very rounded, very soft, very sweet, polished sherry character. We're not in the sort of rough and ready Springbank style of sherry. We're a lot more towards the sort of the polished Macallan end of the sherry spectrum. Yes, it's good. It's clean and totally blemish free. It's pleasant. I liked the nose more. I liked the balance on the nose. I felt that the palate just a little bit too much sherry for my own personal taste, but yeah, a good bottling nevertheless. Okay, so moving on to the Stiùireadair. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? More sherry, more treacle, less of the aromatic high-toned sort of sherry notes. It's a lot denser, maltier. It's got that fragrant malty, dark, treacly kind of character. It's denser. Again, touch of smoke, just a little bit in the background, touch of salt as well. Overall, I would say interesting, but less interesting than the 12-year-old. I'm not really getting any barley character. I'm not really getting any of that sort of wonderful fruity sort of distillery character, that summery fresh fruit character. It really is youngish-ish sherry. A little bit of coffee possibly. Let's see what the palate like. Chewy, creamy, malty, dark, lots of treacle, lots of sherry. Again, very polished. It's got a pleasant level of maturity. It's not sort of like too young. It's got a slight pruniness on the finish. Again, that sort of treacly note kind of lingers, but it's got probably a little bit more of a saltiness, certainly in the aftertaste, which kind of balances up the sweetness of the sherry. But again, you know, there's no distillery character. It's all about the cask, and it's very clean. Again, there's no blemishes. It's very polished. Yeah, I mean, it's pleasant. It's, you know, it is what it is at the end of the day, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 18-year-old. It's getting a bit expensive these days, but I suppose in the grand scheme of things, you know, it's about right. I mean, what's it about? 100 quid now, I guess. You might be able to pick it up for about 90 something odd, and I suppose that's par for the course for an 18 at the end of the day. But anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Obviously, more maturity. The sherry seems to have settled down a little bit. Yes, it's still quite treacly, but it's not quite so creamy and obvious. There's a lovely sort of slightly Armagnac-y kind of rancio coming in. So this is where, to me, sherry cask whiskies do start to develop some interest, because you're starting to get the oxidation character and that sort of combination of wood and oxidation that gives it that sort of slight Armagnac-y kind of rancio. There's a licorice, dark treacle, tar, but there's also some macerated orange, a little bit of almost orange conserve, touch of syrup, dark syrup, wood spice. So okay, no distillery character again, no barley, no fruit, nothing like that. But you are starting to get the secondary and tertiary characteristics of maturation in, or enhanced maturation in sherry casks, and yeah, I mean it's lovely. There's no off notes again. It's quite polished again. There's no roughness. There's no tannins, which is quite impressive, really, it has to be said. Yeah, it's a lovely whiskey. I mean, it's never the style. It's not going to be the style of whiskey that really floats my boat. It has to be said, or but you know, it is a good whiskey, and if you like this style of whiskey, you know, you are not going to be disappointed. Anyway, let's see what the power's like. A little bit more edginess, a little bit more herbally Oloroso character on the finish, a touch more grilled nuts, some oxidised Armagnac kind of character, treacle, tar, salt, again a little bit of macerated orange. Again, you can't fault the finish. I love the saltiness on the finish, which, you know, stops it being a cloyingly sweet mouthful. Obviously that's enhanced by bottling at 46.3 as well. So yes, really pleasant whiskey, it has to be said. Again, like I said, no distillery character. We're talking all cask orientated here, but very polished. And you know, like I said, you know, if that is the type of whiskey that you really like, then certainly you're going to love that. For me, like I said, it's you know, a bit of a sherry monster, really. Right, okay, on to the 25-year-old now. This has got bleeding expensive, hasn't it? I mean, I don't know what this is going for now, but I wouldn't even, I can't even hazard a guess. I should have looked it up before I started doing the video, really, shouldn't I? But anyway, let's see what the nose is giving us then. More coastally, lighter. Again, more of that Armagnac kind of rancio, elegant, salt laden. Dried fruits, a touch of wininess, prunes, walnut, wood spice. I mean, that has just got a beautiful maturity. I mean, you know, you could drink this in place of a cognac or an Armagnac. It just has that quality to it, and it's not overly dense. Like I said, it's got a lightness of touch to it. It's almost a bit of fishiness, possibly. I mean, yes, gorgeous, mature sherry cask whiskey. I mean, I'm actually getting a little bit of lime, a little bit of gooseberry. Maybe I am starting to get a little bit of distillery character. Maybe this is what it is. Maybe with some whiskies, you just age them long enough for the sort of like the sherry to kind of peak and then start to sort of like drop off a little bit, and maybe the distillery character is just starting to just come through a little bit. But I mean, it's just a beautiful nose. I mean, absolutely stunning. And you know, it's no surprise that it constantly, you know, is Isla Whiskey of the Year at the World Whiskey Awards, because it is just frighteningly good. See what the pulse like. That's a lovely finish. Kind of kicks off with an almost kind of chalky saltiness, and then a little bit more richer sherry kind of comes through, a little darker, a little bit more treacly. But again, there's that sort of lovely oxidised character, a little bit of licorice, a little bit of wood smoke. I'm not getting the sort of feeling of distillery character on the palate that I certainly got on the nose. It's got a lovely spicy intensity on the finish, a sort of, you know, sweet, peppery sort of spiciness. Again, obviously the alcohol is kind of enhancing that, and the salt on the finish, but it's got an elegance, it's got a lightness of touch. Again, it's not sort of a thumping sort of herbal Oloroso monster. Again, it's quite polished, not overly tannic, very soft, very drinkable. But again, it's never going to be a whiskey that sort of really sort of, you know, grabs me and sort of goes, my God, this is the greatest whiskey on the face of the planet. I mean, it's great quality, and no doubt about that. And again, you know, if you love sort of old sherry matured whiskies, then damn, that's bloody good. You know, but you know, it is what it is at the end of the day, and you know, you're either going to go for it or you're not. Right, okay, and let's finish off with a bit of peat then, a bit of I think I got the pronunciation about right there. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Obvious peat. There's quite a lot of peat here. Sweet peat, aromatic peat, slightly gritty peat as well. It's actually more complex than I remember it. I did read my tasting notes that I'd written for when I tasted this for the World Whisky Awards, and I did say it was a little bit simplistic, but probably maybe I was having a bit of an off day, because it's got a nice balance of American oak and sherry. It's got some sweet peat, like I said, some almost violety peat, a nice kind of, again, macerated orange character. Not getting a great deal of barley, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, that's what I loved about the Quabernash. That was just such a lovely whiskey. You know, you could taste the inherent sort of character of the spirit along with a bit of peat, you know. Bit of burnt wood, bit of driftwood, bonfires, that kind of thing. A little bit of chocolate coming out there. I actually think I probably, well, I wouldn't say did it a disservice when I wrote my initial tasting notes, but certainly it seems a little bit more complex than I remember it to be. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Quite dusty, aromatic peat smoke on the finish, a little bit heavier on the sherry on the palate, not quite getting so much of the American oak character on the palate. Lovely sweet peat finish, a little bit of violet, a little bit of bog myrtle possibly, a little bit of kind of, not straw, not quite, yeah, that kind of sort of character. It's not seaweedy, it's not medicinal, it's not that type of peat, it has to be said. Chewy, malty, nice intensity, again, lovely saltiness, it kind of balances up the sweetness of the sherry. I'd like to have seen a little bit more American oak character on the palate, it has to be said. Like I said, the sherry was a little bit more obvious on the palate, and I don't think that the palate quite has the balance of the nose personally. Still, it's a lovely whiskey, it has to be said, and I think if you love peated Bunna, then again you'll like that. Again, pristinely clean, no sulphur, Certainly, I mean, once Edrington, and certainly since Burn Stewart have had the company, I mean, I think obviously the wood policy, which started with obviously with Edrington cleaning the whole thing up, has carried on, and good, because I mean, if you are the sort of distillery that uses a lot of sherry casks, well, you are playing with fire if you don't get damn good quality butts, as they say, and we all like good quality butts, don't we? Anyway, yeah, so the unpronounceable, yeah, it's okay. It's not too bad. Right, okay. So let's sum today's episode of the show up. Well, yeah, I still love Bunnahabhain. I still will always prefer Bunnahabhain aged in American oak. I am not a sherry lover. I can be objective about sherried whiskies, and I'd like to think that I'm always objective about sherried whiskies. And I still like the 12-year-old. Yes, it's a little bit more heavier on the sherry than it used to be, but you can still just about get a bit of the distillery character, a bit of that lovely sort of fragrant, summery, aromatic, spirit character, which as far as I'm concerned, that's Bunnahabhain's kind of key selling point. The Stiùireadair, yeah, okay, nothing wrong with it at all. Youngish sort of sherry, sort of, you could argue a little bit one-dimensional, but certainly quality-wise, can't argue with that. The 18-year-old, again, yes, another good quality whiskey, blemish-free. Starting to get a little bit of that sort of Armagnac oxidised kind of character. Personally preferred the nose to the palate, but again, can't argue with that particular bottling. And the 25, yeah, again, stunningly good whiskey, great whiskey, it has to be said, great, or should I say, great sherried whiskey, should we say. A little bit lighter. Again, I think if the nose had kind of carried through onto the palate, I would have loved it even more. I thought the nose was, maybe it's because I was kind of hunting for the distillery character that I could kind of pick it out a little bit. But it certainly felt to me that the sherry character had kind of plateaued and then sort of was starting to drop off a little bit. Yes, you were getting the secondary and tertiary characteristics of that kind of maturation, but I just felt like I could get a little bit of distillery character there. Maybe, like I said, because I was hunting for it. On the palate, I didn't get that. It was sort of mature sherry, but a sort of a light, elegant, and very sort of commercial is the wrong word. It has a very sort of soft and commercially kind of sherry character. It doesn't have the gritty intensity of, say, something like, say, Springbank sherry. But it's still an absolutely lovely whiskey. And the yeah, again, I thought the nose was actually more complex than I remember it in actual fact, and again I thought the balance was really nice. Again, the palate was more sherried influenced and less interesting as far as I was concerned, but again, I think it's just another very, very good whiskey, and I think you can say that sort of across the board the quality of what Bunnahabhain are bottling is extremely high, and I think you can confidently buy certainly a distillery bottling. Some of the independents are a bit hit and miss, it has to be said, but we're not talking about those today. And one of these days, like I said, I will hopefully shoehorn in an independent Bunna bottling tasting episode of the show. But I've still got those that I've lined up. But anyway, that's for another day. So that's Bunnahabhain for you. Like I said, if it's available in your market, check out the 12-year-old. I think the 12-year-old would be, my personal choice if you're going to sort of like, look at value for money, sort of to get a bit of distillery character and balance. Yes, the older bottlings are good, but they're bloody expensive. Anyway, I think I've waffled enough. So So basically, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone that's commented, and the amazing amount of thumbs up I got for the Springbank episode show was really, really gratifying, it has to be said. And yes, I will get round to answering everybody's questions in due course when I have the time, and hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. Anyway, so all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.